All right, you guys. When last we read chapters 32 through 35. In chapter 35, we know that VG ended up taking Ruku to Selena Auntie to the children's home because she was so sick. And Selena Auntie called Dr. Sumitra, and Dr. Sumitra ended up diagnosing Ruku with something called dengue fever. So I wanted to show you guys what dengue fever was. So let's watch a little clip about that. If I can get it to play, that is.
Here's what you need to know about dengue fever. Dengue affects about 400 million people annually around the world, and it's on the rise, up 30-fold in the last 50 years. Dengue is typically not found in the United States, but southern states have been seeing outbreaks in recent years, with cases brought in from warmer locales. Dengue is carried by the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which isn't native to the U.S. Dengue is usually not fatal, but can be so painful it's nicknamed break-bone fever. And in its severest forms, it does kill about 22,000 people every year, according to the World Health Organization. There are no treatments or vaccines, but companies from Sanofi to Merck are working on it, and researchers are working hard to keep the mosquito population at bay. Until then, wear your bug spray.
Hey, you. Okay, so talking about the dengue fever, that rash and all those symptoms that Riku had were what helped the doctor to diagnose it. And remember, they were in the monsoon season and they were outside and they were always talking about being bit by mosquitoes. And if you ever watch on TV, you'll always see the people, they'll have something called mosquito nets. I'll show you what that looks like. They don't typically, it's a warmer weather. They don't necessarily have screens on their windows or screen doors. So if you look at this picture, around their beds, they'll have, and we have them sometimes just to look fancy. Some of you may have them, some of you girls especially may have them over your bed at home, but they actually have them for safety purposes because mosquitoes are dangerous. Not only do mosquito bites bring dengue fever, but they also bring something called malaria. So they'll put them over their bed and the webbing keep the mosquitoes away. In the same way, in the summer, if we didn't have the air conditioning on, we raised the windows. We would have to have screens in the windows that keeps the bugs out. If you go camping, you would have screens or bug repellent to keep the bugs out. And this is important. They hang them up to keep these things from giving them serious illnesses. And what the mosquitoes do is they bite one person that's infected, and when they bite, they drink your blood, and then they'll go to the next person and bite that person, and then when they bite you, they get a little bit of their blood into you, and that causes the infection. All right, chapter 36, gone. I ate and slept, but hardly spoke to the other girls in my room, or the boys who slept in the other part of the house. Remember, she's at Selena Auntie's rescue home for the orphans. After breakfast, Selena Auntie drove me from the house where she lived, along with 2 teachers and all the children, to the hospital. There, I held your hand and told you our story, although you slept the whole time. Muthu was delirious, raving in his sleep. Remember, Muthu had it as well. And Muthu had told them why he didn't want to contact Selena Auntie, because he had been taken to an orphanage. He also told the reason why he didn't call a rural brother, but he called him boss. And that's because his own stepbrother had sold him as a slave. And then when he was rescued from human trafficking, he was taken to an orphanage, and the actual person who ran the orphanage treated him like a slave and beat him and was very cruel to him. So he had a bitter taste in his mouth, and he didn't want to trust Selena Auntie. And when I say a bitter taste in his mouth, that is an idiom. That just means he had had a bad experience and he didn't trust the word orphanage. Muthu was delirious, raving in his sleep. Doctor confirmed you both had dengue fever, except you had developed pneumonia too. Muthu hadn't, so his condition was less complicated. A night or two later, Dr. Sumitra proclaimed that Muthu was out of danger, and he was sent to another part of the hospital. When I saw him, scrubbed clean by a nurse, with his hair cut short and washed and brushed, I could hardly believe it was Muthu. I realized I must have looked more presentable too because Selena Auntie had given me clothes, and I'd bathed and combed my hair. But Muthu didn't comment on my appearance. He just asked, "How's Ruku?" "Not well enough," I said. He slipped his fingers through mine. They felt bony as a skeleton's. "Will you tell me a story, Aka?" he asked. "The fairy tale you used to tell on the bridge?" I tried a few times but kept choking up, unable to get beyond the first sentences. "Never mind," Muthu squeezed my hand tight. "Remember," he called her Aka, that means sister. "And also remember the reason that Arul is not there is he chose to stay on his own. He chose not to go, and Selena Auntie told him she didn't make the kids go. They came by choice." And that was kind of a hint that she was really a good person because if she were evil, if she were bad, she would want to force the kids to go. That afternoon, a surprise was waiting for me. Arul. I couldn't stand being away, Arul said. "I'd rather be locked in with all of you than alone and free." His words felt like a warm ray of sunshine. There you go, simile. Slipping in through a rain-soaked sky. Arul had brought with him the new doll I'd bought you, the one you'd been too sick to play with. When we visited you that night, I took the doll with us, hoping your eyes would light up when you saw her, but by the time we stood by your bed, your own body was as stiff as a wooden doll's, and it was too late. Remember, in order to get the money to buy medicines and things, she had taken Kuti and sold him to the rich lady at the house that had the wall around it where the gardener had thrown the oranges. The little girl had wanted the dog, and she'd offered them, I think, 1,000 rupees. And in the first place, Viji had refused. But then when she got desperate, a couple of things. Even though she would be separated from Kuti, she knew that Kuti would be better off because he would have a better home and they would be good to him. And also she knew it was more important to get medicines for Ruku. So she had to make an adult decision. And again, these are hard decisions. These are the types of decisions that little children shouldn't have to make. These are decisions that adults have to make. Selena Auntie asked many questions. Hadn't I written a letter to someone? Were our parents alive? Shouldn't she try to contact them? No, I said, definitely not. What should she do with your body? I didn't reply. Burned or buried? What was the difference? You were gone. Arul answered me. He said, you were Christian, so we should bury you. And I thought of lighting candles and didn't say no. So at the end of 36, when it said up here that she was stiff, we know now why at the beginning of the story, Viji was so upset why she was with Selena Auntie and separated from Ruku, why she didn't know her address and how to get a hold of her, but why Selena Auntie said, go ahead and write to her anyway, because I think she'll hear your words. And also it will help you to get your thoughts out. And that's because that the dengue fever had actually taken Ruku's life. She had passed away. When they're talking about buried or burned, in the Hindu religion, they use cremation a lot. I know nowadays people, even Christian people, cremate, but really, I'm not a Catholic, so I'm not sure about this, but I'm pretty confident that my grandparents, who were non-Catholic Christians, would never have agreed to being cremated. It was just a no-no. And I feel like maybe that would be a Catholic thing as well. Now in the modern age, that might not be as big of a deal. Okay, let's look at our chapter questions for 36. And again, there's only one question. The vocabulary word delirious, we know that we just read that Muthu was delirious with the dengue fever. So he was kind of talking out of his head, didn't know where he was. Why do you think VG did not argue with a rules suggestion? Meaning, I'm assuming the burial of Ruku's body, because he said that Ruku was a Christian. And if you remember, Ruku had really liked the candle lighting at the church when Ruku had taken him. So I don't know. Think about that a little bit as you're answering your question. All right, guys, chapter 37 is called Stones. Christmas came about a month after your funeral. The rains had stopped by then. In the hall of the home, Selena Auntie set up a little crochet, a set of dolls in a stable. I'll have to look that up, you guys. A baby Yesu, Mary, Joseph, 3 kings, a drummer boy, and lots of animals. Outside the front door, she hung a paper star with a twinkling light inside. You'd have loved all of this, as well as the strings of lights she wound around the crochet, and the branch she stuck in a pot and called a Christmas tree. She gave all of us presents. The little kids who lived at the home laughed and gave me friendly smiles. But it was hard for me to act like I was good spirits. Arul and Muthu got fancy kurtas, which they changed into right away. I noticed they both put on a bit of weight, but though Muthu's body looked less frail than before, his eyes hadn't regained their twinkle, and he wasn't the chatterbox you knew either. He was unusually quiet around me, like he knew I couldn't stand it if he started making jokes. Okay, guys, so I had to know, and I was pronouncing it incorrectly. It was a creche, and I did not know in all these years of growing up as a Christian and celebrating the birth of Christ that the nativity scene that you set up in your house, similar to this, and all these different ones that you might set up, oops, not that, what's that, is called a creche. Yep, that's what they're called. And people have them set up in their front yard or at church or in your house. These little scenes like this at your church, it's called a creche. How about that? And guys, this is the kurta or kurta that Selena Auntie bought for the boys. It's a traditional shirt that you would see men wearing in India. It's collarless and comfortable, and they're usually long, like a tunic type deal. There's fancier ones, and there's like everyday ones that they might wear, as you can see by these models that are wearing them. But I thought that was interesting too. I had to know what it is. All right, so she was talking about how Muthu was different. He wasn't as light and joking, and she didn't know if he was not being that way because of her, or if he was not being that way just because he didn't feel like being that way. You look smart in your new clothes, I managed to say. What did you get, Akah? Muthu asked. I didn't care what my gift was, but I opened the package for his sake. I got a notebook, handmade paper, and pencils made from recycled scraps. What's this for? Muthu asked. To write on, Selena Auntie said. I have no one to write to and nothing to say, I told her. She didn't respond, not right away. But before we went to bed that night, Selena Auntie called me into the schoolroom and motioned me forward toward one of the empty desks. Sit, she ordered. Write. Write, I said. Why? Because you're not talking much anymore, VG, and that's not healthy. Your thoughts are sitting inside you like a stone, and I think you should set them down on paper. Stared at the empty page before me and picked up the pencil, and she corrected my grip, and I stared at the page some more. Now she's showing her how to hold the pencil correctly, which if you all were allowed to, I would do. The paper seemed to stretch. Its emptiness grew, and mine grew too. My fingers went limp, and the pencil rolled off onto the floor. She picked up the pencil and put it in my hands again. For months, I couldn't write Ruku. Selena Auntie would sit beside me reading, keeping silent company. Arul and Muthu visited your grave in a nearby cemetery every week and laid flowers on it. I didn't join them, but I did all the chores I was supposed to do at the home. In fact, I liked doing chores, not only because it made me feel like I was not living on charity, but also because it gave me a reason to do something when I felt like a rock was sitting on my chest, weighing me down so I couldn't rise out of bed. Here are the chapter questions for chapter 37. Your vocabulary is frail. So when someone's weak and frail, in this context, the connotation, which would be the meaning based on how it's used in the book here, would be around someone who's sick, not well, weak. And then the question, is there power in believing in yourself? Is there power in believing in yourself? And what does that mean, I guess? Can your thoughts change your circumstances? Is there mind over matter, so to speak? Can your attitude change your circumstances, your thoughts? In this chapter is titled Stones. How is this symbolic? And in what way does it relate to the chapter? So think about stones. What did she say was sitting on her chest? And was that figurative? That's figurative language. That's a metaphor. There wasn't really a stone sitting on her chest. It dealt with her feelings. What mood does the chapter title set from the start? If you think about stones being like rocks, feelings, emotions, not in a positive way. And then the response question, how has Ruku's death affected Vici? So think about that a little bit. All right, guys, chapter 38. During the day, students of all ages sit together in the biggest room in the house, learning, reading, writing, mathematics, history, geography, science. The teachers give us different things to do, and we work at our own pace. Arul doesn't join us because he has no interest in schoolwork. Instead, he takes a bus every morning to work with a carpenter. Selena Auntie says this is an important path too, getting special skills to become carpenters, tailors, gardeners, or to learn some other trade. She says she wishes she had more space so she could take in every homeless kid, but she can't. She doesn't have enough space for all of us to live here forever. So those who are older, like me, and especially like Arul, who's even a bit older, are allowed to stay for a bit until we have a safe, sure place to move to. Before our lessons each morning, we gather in the hall to pray. Most of the children here are Christian, like Selena Auntie, and you would have guessed that by her setting up the nativity scene. But some are Hindu and 2 are Muslims. The prayer assembly is unending. Selena Auntie starts off with Arul's favorite prayer to Our Father. And then there are prayers to Mary and Allah and some Hindu chants that Amma used to say. When I hear those, I miss Amma. It amazes me that there are so many different words to pray with and so many different people praying, but there's still so much misery and cruelty in the world. And you all, I have my opinions on this, and you know I'm a Christian, so I believe in the God of heaven, and so I can only speak from that perspective. But from that perspective, I will tell you my personal opinion only about the God of heaven, and that is that the God of heaven, he gives us as Christians free will. He doesn't force anything on us. So we read our Bible, we're taught right from wrong. We have morals, but he's not gonna like control us and force us. And so people make choices based on their own selfishness, or they make choices despite their selfishness. So in my personal opinion, the misery and cruelty in the world comes from that. This morning, during the prayer assembly, I yawned, and Muthu caught my eye and started yawning too. That always happens, doesn't it, guys? Soon, I'd set the whole place yawning. Priya Auntie, one of the other teachers, told me off. You're the oldest girl here, she said. If you don't start showing respect, all the other little ones are going to behave badly. So good manners dictates that you stifle or hold in a yawn. At the very least, cover your mouth and make it discreet. You don't like yawn real big with your mouth open for everybody to see. It's kind of like burping. You cover it and hold it in. You don't do that. It's not respectful. Nobody wants to see the whole inside of your mouth. I don't behave badly, I said. Don't talk back. Her face flushed redder than a brick, lips quivering with rage. She hauled me off to Selena Auntie's office and ranted. Selena Auntie listened and didn't let me say a word until after Priya Auntie stormed off into the classroom. Fiji, I can imagine you feel guilty about your sister's death, but you need to stop accusing yourself. You made the choices that seemed best. You did all you could. Those weren't the words I expected from her. Religion can be a soulless, Fiji. Guys, that means like a sun or a place of comfort. If you have faith in a higher power, if you trust that each life has a purpose, whether we see it or not, if you could only believe your sister has a soul that's still alive. You want to convert me? You can't, I told her. Ask Arul. He's been trying ever since we met. I'm not trying and never will try to convert you, VG. It's just that when we suffer a loss like you have, we lose a sense of purpose. I lost hope when I lost my husband, and I found it again in God. But it's not the only way. Maybe your way is to search inside yourself and rediscover purpose. My life felt pointless now that you were gone. She got that right, but I didn't say so. You also need to respect Priya Auntie's position, she said quietly. We can't have children here being disrespectful to any religion. I'm not mean about any one religion, I said. They're all equally silly. An amused smile flickered across her face. We can't have you being disrespectful to all religions either. What about respecting my non-religion? I thought. As though I'd spoken those words, Selena Auntie said, I think I understand you, VG. She wrote 2 words on a piece of paper and turned it toward me so I could read them. God and good, side by side. Those 2 words, God and good, are only 1 letter apart in the English language, she said. So maybe when we pray in the morning, if you don't want to think of God, you might try thinking about being good, about doing good. Yes? Okay, I said. I don't mind if you have no faith in religion, VG, just as long as you have faith in the goodness within yourself. You guys, here are the vocabulary words, and there's just the response question for chapter 38. Misery, which again, in the context of losing her sister, who was basically her only, for many, many years, her only friend and confidant, besides Muthu and Arul. Solace, I talked to you about, which is what Selena Auntie told her. Solace is what a lot of people take in religion or a relationship with their God. And then the response question is, what advice does Selena Auntie give to VG? And how do you think it will impact her? So I'm assuming they're asking about the advice about God and goodness. So you need to really think about that. Chapter 39, losing and finding. Selena Auntie assigned me and Arul the job of doing the dishes together. For months, we didn't talk much as we worked side by side in the kitchen. But one evening, Arul finally broke the silence. He asked how I was doing, and when, as usual, I just said, fine, he wouldn't let me get away with it. No, he said, you're not fine, VG. I said nothing. Talk to me, he said. Let me help. I don't need your help, I growled. Arul sighed. Sulking and being rude to people who care about you isn't going to make life any easier. Since when, I said, has life been easy? Since now. Arul let a dish clatter into the sink. Some things are easier here than on the bridge, in spite of all that's happened. And you have to stop feeling sorry for yourself. I don't just sulk. I shocked myself by shouting for the first time since your passing. I do every chore I'm given. I clean, I sit in the classroom, I eat, I sleep. You don't look like you've been sleeping much. That's because Ruku is gone, Arul. She's gone because of me. If I hadn't forced her to leave home, if she hadn't come here with you, she'd never enjoyed the good times we had. And we had so many good times, Vijay. I should have never run away. What choice did you have? I've heard of parents who beat their kids to death. Who knows what your father might have done? You tried your best. It's my fault Ruku died. Your fault. You couldn't see into the future. If you're to blame, we are too. If I believed you when you were scared the way smart man would come after us, we might never have been forced to live in that mosquito-infested graveyard. If Muthu hadn't scared you off from Selena Auntie, you might have come here sooner. He couldn't comfort me. I banged the pan against the sink. I want her back. Stop it. Arul yanked the pan out of my hands. I miss her too. So does Muthu. She's not your sister. She's mine. Mine. Now I have no one. You're no more alone than Muthu and I are, Arul yelled. If you choose to drown in loneliness, go ahead, but don't claim she wasn't our sister. We're not just friends. We're family. The loudness of his tone shocked me. Start looking at what you haven't lost, Arul said. Start giving thanks for what you do have. Thanks? An odd sort of snort left my lips. That's all you ever do. If someone came to stab you, you'd probably thank them too, wouldn't you? But there's nothing to be thankful about. Yes, there is, he said, taking my soapy hands in his. You're here in this home with a chance to do something more with your life. You have Selena Auntie. You have me. You have Muthu. And most of all, you have yourself. Myself? Yes. And now you've been angry and raised your voice again. You'll feel a lot better. Just wait and see. He was right. When I left the kitchen that night, I found I actually wanted to write to you for the first time. Easter came, and I finally agreed to visit your grave with Arul and Muthu. On your stone, instead of flowers, I laid down one of the chocolate Easter eggs Selena Auntie had given us. She'd have loved that, Muthu said. Sweet, gooey, and wrapped in green foil, her favorite color. I'm sure she'd have loved the flowers you always leave for her too, I said. As we left the cemetery where you'd been buried, Arul said Easter was about new beginnings, but some things will never change, Ruku. You'll never be back. All right, guys, for chapter 39, again, just the response question and one vocabulary word, infested. And this was in response to the mosquitoes in the graveyard. And I guess because all the low-lying areas during the monsoon, one of the videos that I watched said that the mosquitoes that cause the dengue fever will be like in old tires where water sits or old buckets or mud puddles. But since there are all these little low-lying places where the graves had sunk in and things in the graveyard, there was probably places where once the rain stopped, the water would just sit in puddles and it would get really, really hot. And you know how water gets all green and whatever, and the mosquitoes, that's where they breed. That's where their breeding ground. So it becomes infested. And your response question, how is VG feeling in this chapter?